By the summer of 1916, Europe had already endured nearly 2 years of war. The optimism that had greeted the outbreak of conflict in 1914 had largely disappeared. Across the Western Front, vast trench systems stretched from the English Channel to Switzerland. Millions of soldiers remained trapped in a deadly stalemate. Both sides searched for a way to break the deadlock. French forces were heavily engaged at Verdun, where one of the war's most brutal battles was already consuming enormous resources. To relieve pressure on their allies and achieve a breakthrough, British and French commanders prepared a major offensive along the River Somme in northern France. The operation would become one of the most famous battles in military history, not because it delivered a decisive victory, but because it revealed the terrifying reality of modern industrial warfare. The offensive was the result of months of planning. British commanders believed that overwhelming artillery power could destroy German defenses before infantry moved forward. Thousands of guns were assembled along the front. Millions of artillery shells were stockpiled. The plan appeared straightforward. A prolonged bombardment would cut barbed wire, destroy trenches, eliminate machine gun positions, and break enemy morale. Once the artillery had done its work, infantry would advance across no man's land and occupy the shattered German positions. Many officers believed success was not only possible but likely. The confidence reflected a widespread belief that technology and preparation could overcome the defensive advantages of trench warfare. The coming battle would put that belief to the test. On June 24, 1916, the artillery bombardment began. For 7 days, Allied guns fired almost continuously. The noise could be heard dozens of kilometers away. Entire sections of the battlefield disappeared beneath clouds of smoke and dust. Commanders watching from behind the lines believed the destruction was immense. Reports suggested that German defenses were being systematically annihilated. Many soldiers waiting in the trenches shared the same expectation. They imagined that little resistance would remain once the infantry attack began. But beneath the shattered surface, many German soldiers were surviving. Deep underground shelters protected thousands of defenders from the worst effects of the bombardment. When the guns finally fell silent, many of those defenders would emerge ready to fight. At 7:30 in the morning on July 1, 1916, whistles sounded along the British lines. Thousands of soldiers climbed from their trenches and began moving forward. For many, this was their first experience of combat. Among them were members of the so-called PALS battalions, units composed of friends, co-workers, neighbors, and even entire groups from the same towns and cities. The idea had been simple. Men who volunteered together would serve together. Now they advanced together into one of the most dangerous battlefields in history. In many sectors, soldiers were ordered to walk rather than run. Commanders believed the bombardment had destroyed most German resistance. Heavy equipment, ammunition, and supplies also made rapid movement difficult. As the first waves crossed no man's land, they encountered a reality very different from what planners had expected. German machine guns began firing, and within minutes, the battlefield became a scene of catastrophe. The German defenses had not been destroyed. In many areas, barbed wire remained intact. Machine gun crews emerged from deep shelters as soon as the artillery barrage ended. Protected positions gave them clear fields of fire across open ground. British soldiers found themselves exposed with little cover. The results were devastating. Entire waves of infantry were cut down before reaching enemy trenches. Some units suffered catastrophic losses within minutes. Officers attempting to organize advances became immediate targets. Messengers, stretcher-bearers, and support troops faced the same danger. Across the front, confusion spread rapidly. Yet many soldiers continued moving forward despite overwhelming odds. Acts of courage occurred everywhere. But courage alone could not overcome the deadly mathematics of machine guns firing against troops advancing in the open. The scale of the disaster became apparent as reports began reaching headquarters. Entire battalions had been shattered. In some communities across Britain, multiple generations of young men disappeared in a single morning. The PALS battalions suffered particularly heavily. Because friends, relatives, and co-workers served together, losses were concentrated within individual towns and cities. The consequences extended far beyond the battlefield. Families would soon receive devastating news. Factories lost workers. Schools lost former students. Entire neighborhoods mourned together. For many communities, July 1, 1916, would become a date remembered for generations. The battle was no longer simply a military operation. It had become a national tragedy. By the end of the first day, the British Army had suffered approximately 57,000 casualties. Of those, more than 19,000 had been killed. No single day in British military history had produced losses on such a scale. The numbers shocked military leaders, politicians, and civilians alike. Yet despite the enormous casualties, the offensive did not stop. Commanders believed abandoning the operation would waste the sacrifices already made. Additional attacks were planned. More soldiers were committed. The battle continued. For those on the front lines, the terrible events of July 1st were only the beginning. The Somme would continue for months, and the casualty lists would continue to grow. As the summer progressed, the battle evolved into a prolonged struggle of attrition. British and French forces continued launching attacks against German positions. Sometimes small advances were achieved. A trench line might be captured. A fortified position might fall. A village might change hands. Yet every gain came at a heavy price. The battlefield itself became increasingly hostile. Rain transformed shell craters into pools of mud. Destroyed terrain complicated movement and supply operations. Artillery remained the dominant force. Explosions reshaped the landscape daily. The Somme was becoming another example of the brutal reality that had already emerged at Verdun. Modern industrial warfare could consume enormous numbers of lives without producing decisive results. One of the most important aspects of the Somme offensive was its connection to Verdun. French forces had been under immense pressure there for months, and Allied leaders hoped the Somme attack would force Germany to divert troops and resources away from Verdun. In this sense, the offensive had a broader strategic purpose beyond territorial gains. The battle also revealed differences in military experience. The British Army of 1916 was very different from the small professional force that had entered the war in 1914. Years of recruiting had created a much larger army filled with volunteers who had trained for war but had limited combat experience. Many of these men faced conditions they could never have imagined. Noise on an industrial scale, constant artillery fire, mass casualties, and the psychological strain of prolonged combat. The Somme became not only a battlefield, but a harsh education in modern warfare. As the fighting continued into the autumn, weather conditions worsened. Rain turned large sections of the battlefield into deep mud. Movement became exhausting. Weapons malfunctioned. Wounded soldiers sometimes drowned in water-filled shell holes. Supply lines struggled to keep pace with the demands of the front. Despite these conditions, attacks continued. Commanders still hoped that persistent pressure could eventually break German defenses. The battle consumed artillery shells at an astonishing rate. Factories far from the front worked continuously to supply the armies. The Somme demonstrated how modern war depended not only on soldiers in trenches, but on entire industrial societies supporting them from behind the lines. The battle also witnessed the first large-scale use of a new weapon, the tank. On September 15, 1916, British forces deployed armored vehicles during an attack near Flers-Courcelette. The machines were slow, mechanically unreliable, and few in number. Some broke down before reaching the battlefield. Others became stuck in mud. But their appearance had a powerful psychological effect. For the first time, soldiers saw armored vehicles crossing no man's land under fire. The tank did not transform the battle overnight. Its immediate tactical impact was limited. Yet it signaled the beginning of a new era in warfare. Military technology continued evolving rapidly as nations searched for ways to overcome the deadly stalemate of trench warfare. By November 1916, the offensive was losing momentum. Months of fighting had produced enormous casualties on all sides. The front line had moved in places, but no decisive breakthrough had occurred. When the battle finally ended in November, the scale of the losses was staggering. Combined casualties among British, French, and German forces exceeded 1 million. The exact numbers remain debated by historians, but the human cost was unmistakable. The Somme had become one of the bloodiest battles in history. For Britain, the first day remained especially traumatic. The losses of July 1st entered national memory as a symbol of sacrifice, tragedy, and the brutal realities of the First World War. In the years that followed, historians and military leaders studied the Battle of the Somme extensively. Some viewed it primarily as a tragic example of failed planning and unrealistic expectations. Others argued that the offensive weakened German forces and contributed to long-term Allied success. The debate continues today. What remains beyond dispute is the immense scale of the suffering. Entire communities across Britain, France, Germany, and other nations were affected. Families waited for letters that never arrived. Parents lost sons. Children grew up without fathers. The consequences extended far beyond the trenches. The Somme demonstrated that industrialized warfare affected entire societies, not merely the soldiers fighting at the front. It was a battle measured not only in military statistics, but in human lives forever changed. The battlefield itself became a symbol of remembrance. Today, memorials, cemeteries, and preserved sections of the front line remain scattered across the Somme region. Visitors walk among fields that once witnessed some of the most intense fighting of the war. Rows of graves stretch across the landscape. Many bear names. Others are marked simply as unknown soldiers. These sites serve as reminders of the scale of the conflict and the sacrifices made by millions. They also remind future generations that history is not only shaped by decisions made in capitals and headquarters. It is shaped by ordinary individuals whose lives become intertwined with extraordinary events. The Somme remains one of the most powerful examples of that reality. More than a century later, the Battle of the Somme remains one of the defining events of World War I. Its legacy extends beyond military history. It influenced literature, art, politics, and collective memory. For Britain especially, the first day of the battle became a lasting symbol of sacrifice. For military historians, the Somme provides important lessons about leadership, technology, logistics, and the challenges of offensive warfare. For the world, it stands as a warning about the costs of prolonged conflict. The soldiers who crossed no man's land on July 1, 1916, could not know how history would remember them. But their experiences would help define an entire generation. And their story continues to be told more than 100 years later. The Battle of the Somme began with confidence. It continued through sacrifice. And it ended as one of the most costly battles in human history. The offensive failed to achieve the decisive breakthrough its planners envisioned, but it changed the course of the war and transformed how military leaders understood modern combat. Its greatest legacy, however, lies not in maps or military reports. It lies in the memory of the millions whose lives were touched by the battle. More than a century later, the Somme remains a reminder of the human cost of war.